for making this the last panel and making it, I think, really to an end of a very long but very good and productive conference. We are, frankly, going to put together the last piece of the conversation in this panel. We are proud to bring together defense, government, industry, and academia. And this particular panel is going to feature industry perspectives, business perspectives, and I am sure that the questions will follow accordingly. We've heard a lot about the maritime strategy. We've had a lot of information on information warfare and good dialogue across the board throughout the networking we've had a chance to do. So it is indeed a pleasure for me to introduce the moderator. He pointed out a lifetime USNI member, and I know a strong supporter of AFCEA, so it's certainly a pleasure today to have a chance to introduce the Honorable J. Cohen, Principal at the Chertoff Group, and was the former Chief of Naval Operations, a 1968 graduate of the Naval Academy, a decorated Navy career, culminating in 6 years as the Chief of Naval Research. Admiral Cohen then joined the Department of Homeland Security as Undersecretary for Science and Technology. In addition to serving on several professional boards, he's now a principal at, as I mentioned, the Chertoff Group, focusing on a broad range of science, technology, and security issues, I think perfectly suited to moderate this esteemed panel. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. J. Chertoff.
Hey. Thank you.
Maybe.
Well, first of all, thank you all for taking the time to be here, and hopefully our performance will be valuable to you, and maybe the last will be best. I especially want to thank Naval Institute and AFCEA, two incredible organizations. I just want to piggyback on the CNO's comments this morning. I just think this USNI AFCEA West has come such an incredible way. It is a premier event, and as was indicated, bringing the military, academia, and now industry together. And the displays, I will tell you that Admiral Daly and General Shea are two of my all-time heroes. So we thank you for being here. We live in interesting times, and you've heard that over the last 2 days. I got a chance to sit in on several of the panels and proceedings. It says, future fleet versus physical constraints. So there are so many moving parts right now, it has my head spinning with sequestration, the FY17 budget, Secretary Carter's third reset, all of these things that you've heard discussed. And Admiral Stavridis, who's sort of going to be the alpha and omega of this conference with the lead-off keynote, where he took us on a trip around the world. But the real takeaway to me was it was back to the future. I felt like I was reliving my life and all the challenges that we on the panel had solved for the junior officers in the audience. So I don't know where we went wrong. So we had a session with the type commanders who set the requirements for the military, set the requirements for the SysComs, which then are fulfilled by industry. And I took notes: distributed lethality, sea control, forward presence, Navy integrated fire control concept, all domain access, precision targeting, long-range weapons, operational sanctuaries, high-end fight, balance between current and future readiness, accepting risk. That's what the type commanders on the pointy end were concerned about. Then we heard from the systems commanders who have to turn that into requirements, have to turn that into capability. And I thought we had an eloquent discussion from NavAir. He talked about innovation at speed, addressed rapid prototyping and experimentation, as the CNO did, talked about the concept of airworks, lead system integration, small, agile, move from project to project that lasts months, not years. Gave us examples, full motion video on a P-8 when they needed it, an incredible success story. that governments should not be focused on doing all the work internally, and that may be something that we discuss here or questions come up. Great opportunities for small business. Is the balance between small business and the LSIs right? And finally, the biggest challenge programs of record have gotten slow, risk-adverse. There are accountability issues. That the SysComs are not going to give up technical authority, nor should they. But there has to be better trade space in engineering with industry. The Coast Guard, and I can tell you as a young midshipman, I made the Eagle cruise as an exchange. We went from New London to Miami through the Panama Canal, Acapulco, San Diego, Long Beach, and Seattle, and up into Gallant. With the ship's motion, I learned the real meaning of the word heave. And that's why I became a submariner. And that's a true story. But the Coast Guard's looking at the Arctic, and they only have 3 priorities right now, 3 polar icebreakers. So we really appreciated that. And I thought from the Coast Guard, it was a very interesting comment on innovation, and that's what we're talking about here, innovation and what is missing. What are the challenges from the industry perspective? Where do you enter the organization, whether it is industry or the Navy or the government, and you don't enter at big A acquisition, because big A acquisition is risk adverse. So before I introduce our guests, I'm reminded, and these are really giants in industry. I'm reminded, having been Chief of Naval Research and basically Chief Technology Officer at the Department of Homeland Security, that innovation is a contact sport. It is not for the weak of heart. And for 9 years, 6 in Navy and 3 at DHS, I enjoyed other transaction authority, sole source authority. Every time I used it in the name of innovation, the next day I was under a formal IG investigation, and by the end of the calendar year, I was in front of a House or Senate hearing to find out what stocks my wife had and what I was planning, who I was going to work for after I left the Navy. That was not conducive to taking risk. So it's a very personal story. For our distinguished panelists, when they take risks, they have to report to their stockholders, board of directors, and quarterly returns. So I'm reminded of Teddy Roosevelt's, and I won't quote the whole thing, his famous quote, "It is not the critic who counts. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena." And we have individuals in the arena here today. So what I'd like to do is introduce them. We'll go in the order to my left. Each will give a 3 to 5 minute presentation. We will then have discussions back and forth. I'm not as eloquent as Vice Admiral Daly, so I'll try not to interrupt our guests, and then we will absolutely reserve at least 20 minutes for your questions and comments. Immediately to my left is the Honorable Sean O'Keefe. This is someone who has been to Maine, Spain, and Spokane. He has done it all, a Navy junior. He has been a comptroller. He has been in OMB. He has been on the Hill. He has been Secretary of the Navy. He has been the administrator for NASA under the most trying of times. He has been the Chancellor of Louisiana State University. It just goes on and on and on. And most recently, before heading back to academia, he was the chairman and CEO of EADS, which morphed into Airbus, or as our friends at Boeing call it, Brand X. So we are delighted to have him. Next, we have Dale Bennett. I've known Dale for more years than I care to say. He is literally just back from Singapore, where he was representing Lockheed Martin and involved with their biannual air show. He's the president of Lockheed Martin's Mission and Systems business unit. He has over 19,000 people who work for him. As a young man, he decided to go in the Air Force. And Dale, I'll tell you, in my next life, I'm going Air Force. But I do want to remind you that from the Navy's point of view, we view space as the deepest ocean. It was Captain Kirk, and it was the Starship Enterprise. But I still love your quality of life. He has been with Lockheed Martin for about 35 years. He is a premier leader in industry, and I'm very interested in hearing his comments. Lockheed Martin, in many ways now, has moved closer to the Navy with the F-35 and also with their purchase of Sikorsky. So we're going to have a long and close relationship, you can be sure, with Lockheed Martin. And if you haven't noticed, Dale has great hair. He has great hair. Mike Petters, his hair and I, not the same. But Mike Petters has many other qualities that overshadow that. Like me, Mike Petters is a Naval Academy graduate. He was a nuclear submariner. He decided to join, at that time, Newport News Shipbuilding in the mid-1980s. There have been a lot of evolutions in the shipbuilding business. Northrop Grumman, in a competition with General Dynamics, ended up taking over Newport News Shipbuilding, combining it with Ingalls, and then a few years ago decided to go ahead and spin off what we now call Huntington Ingalls Industries. Mr. Petters was the head of it before it spun off, and then you can imagine the challenges, the integration and the new workforce, new business models, et cetera. And let me just say, he has done an incredible job. And HII, under Mike Petters, is one-stop shopping for the Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard. They do carriers, submarines, amphibious ships. They do the Coast Guard National Security Cutter. They do new construction. They do overhaul. They partner. I mean, they do it all. And enormous stress in the shipbuilding industry because of the budget, because of the demands, and I hope that Mike Petters will talk a little bit about those challenges as we go forward. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Secretary O'Keefe.
Well, thank you, Jay. I appreciate the opportunity, and thanks very much to USNI for the invitation to be here. This is a real treat to be back. Jay did not mention that in his very glowing introduction he received from Bob, that he received a promotion that you all witnessed here of having been a former Chief of Naval Operations. And in as much as I'm sure that would have been a desirement or aspiration that he would have welcomed, we have in our midst one who really was the Chief of Naval Operations. Tom Hayward, it's a pleasure to see you, sir. Great to be here. Thank you.
And if I may add, Admiral Hayward, and many of us were there on your watch, and when you stood up and said, "Not on my watch," that was heroic. Thank you, sir.
Certainly was. No doubt about that at all. I think the context of today's discussion and the panel framework that I think Jay just outlined very, very accurately is the range of different inputs that ultimately motivate or prompt the condition for what needs to be an innovative way of thinking of challenges. But the focus of this panel is, as I understood it, was what's missing. Well, the what's missing part of this, I think, is a clear appreciation of what that backdrop really means. What creates the imperative that either prompts innovation or permits it to occur, or motivates the challenge to have to actually create that environment. And it is usually a combination of events or circumstances of which there is a change to what was perceived to be an absolute. You can't do it this way because. And when those changes or events, changes of events or circumstances then prompt that questioning of exactly what is a perceived absolute, suddenly the way of doing things either turns out to be, upon close examination, either obsolete, inefficient, unresponsive, or simply doesn't yield the outcome that you're looking for. And in my judgment, you've got two primary factors. There are certainly many, many more, but two primary factors which can be that catalyst to promote innovative environment, and then therefore what's missing in the equation in some of the dialogue is a consideration of two primary features. First of which is one that is lots of discussion going on over the course of the last couple of days over the application of technology innovation. How do you insert that technology into a range of different requirements, demands, mission, circumstances, whatever, and capabilities in order to enhance the means to accomplish that goal? And this is one that in today's environment we appreciate, understand, and see around us with regularity. You know, the application of Moore's Law and seeing exactly how fast that pace of technology insertion is occurring in everyday life. You need go no further than pulling out the iPhone to figure that out. I mean, this is a basic fundamental concept that Jobs came up with, which is how do I take a range of existing capabilities, integrate them in a different way to yield a broader outcome? There was little that was created or invented or anything else. It was simply the rearrangement of existing capacity in order to do something exponentially different in order to achieve the same kinds of goals and the same kinds of outcomes and a means to accomplish that task. It was something in which, in many ways, what the brilliance of what Jobs did by creation of this particular mechanism was addressing a market that either didn't know that it existed or that we didn't know that we really wanted to demand it. But once it was available, it became definitely a product or supply push to the opportunity and a demand push on the basis of its availability. And that's the kind of thing that takes a fair amount of not only dexterity but awareness of the existence of those opportunities that would create an innovation imperative or opportunity to be exploited. That's inevitably the context in which there. I think we could argue that today there are multiple cases in which we look at the range of naval service mission requirements and activities, and many of which that Jay again summarized from the previous 2 days' proceedings, have been enunciated, that are really looking for those kinds of innovative changes, to look at that fundamental technology application of rearrangement of existing capacity and capabilities in a different way to yield an exponentially different outcome. And that is the bottom line of what it prompts the technology innovation, not exclusively, but as a dominant feature. The second one, though, is equally important. And that is if a strategic imperative or objective changes fundamentally, that in turn will become the basis upon which the absolutes are considered to be either obsolete, inefficient, or not responsive to what the objective is which defined. And so as a consequence, you look around and you think, okay, well, exactly what is the strategic imperative we're looking at today? I mean, the most graphic example in our lifetime, certainly as professionals in this community, is the circumstances that occurred in the early 1990s and a fundamental change of the strategic objectives and the focus upon how we structured everything. Those were the absolutes. And it was grounded on the proposition that the Cold War required a set-piece range of different hard objectives to be overcome. This is the period of time in which Admiral Hayward excelled. There's no question, much of why we're here is because guys like him led as ably and as courageously as Jay just referred. But it was a change in the strategic consequences not long thereafter of his tenure that ultimately created an environment in which innovation was an imperative, a demand, and that's an element that was what's missing. It was what do we do to address that changing set of circumstances in which the strategic goals are very, very much in question now relative to what the outcomes are we're looking for. And what occurs and what happened, I think, in that period of time, due to great violence to the history, of course, is an adjustment of everyone's strategic outlook, every institutional framework, particularly certainly in the naval service, to one in which morphed into from the sea. And the focus at that time was a huge transformation from that Cold War methodology that worked absolutely right for 50 years, that then suddenly had to shift, and it's been evolving ever since that time in the early 1990s. And we're in part dealing with one of the consequences of how the innovation environment then can be sub-optimized in some circumstances, in which we end up with the tyranny of incrementalism. You apply those capabilities, those innovations, the technology that you think is going to perform in a different way and insert to a different outcome in ways that is maybe not anywhere near as good as it could be, but it's acceptable within the process framework that we created for ourselves. That's acceptable to the lawyers, the IG, whoever else is out there that used to haunt him. Not that I ever had that experience. Gosh, no, I had a charmed life with that. But it is nonetheless the tyranny of incrementalism in turn then drives you to these answers, to do only as much as what the process, what the environment will tolerate you do. So you not get the daily visit or the regular call of exactly which committee you've got to go appear to before in order to account for yourself. It is in that same environment that we're seeing, though, ample evidence now and previously, every time we're engaged in situations like this. I was reflecting the other day with a friend over how quaint this really is when you think back at it, that the resignation of one of my predecessors, Jim Webb, was prompted by what he thought was the outrage of falling below the 600-ship Navy by the retirement of the 1052 class frigates. I mean, you look back on this as a seminal moment in which there was some strategic shift, and it wasn't. It was a mere count. It was less a statement of capability and more about just what's the marker on the wall that's the measure of the merit. And yet that incrementalism is what prompts those kinds of answers and results. Today's version of this, to be heretical for a moment, is the same nature of the argument that goes on over not that number, but a number half that size, and whether it should be larger or smaller than that. This is the tyranny of incrementalism over internecine conflict within the whole process of looking at what is it that's going to determine whether or not we have sufficient capacity, capability, means to go prosecute the outcome that is the naval service objective based on a count. And it is in part a consequence of what we used to hold as an absolute that is still being, in some marginal way, debated in the same context and in the same argument. What we're missing is the opportunity now, to really fundamentally look at either one of those two other imperatives, the technology advance and how it can be rearranged for the purposes that can yield an exponentially better outcome, or the strategic imperative as to what it is you need to focus on to apply those conditions. And in this circumstance, what we need to hope to, and this is going to be a real edgy problem, is a transition period in the course of the next 2 years in which there's an opportunity to transcend that, to look past what those arguments are over those tyranny of incrementalism debates, and look more of those two other factors that are not the dominant or the only, but they are prominent in terms of the things that will motivate those what's missing opportunities to work through this. Now, given the nature of the political debate right now, it's hard to be optimistic about the transcendence of the nature of how any of the candidates are going to step past today's blocking and tackling challenges that will be manifest yet again tomorrow with lots, again, plenty of results and consequences of what that should mean to us and what we ought to interpret from it. But a year from now, someone's going to be there. And some administration is going to have this opportunity to be thinking differently about this, the nature of these problems, and to look at it in a way that, again, is fundamental of either what does the technology offer you the opportunity to do, or what are the strategic imperatives that permit you a chance to use that in a different way.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much. And now, Mr. Bennett.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. It is truly an honor to be with our panelists here today, and I look forward to an opportunity to share some insights. I think I'll just assert two things. One is picking up on the CNO's comments about the rate at which technology is adapted and deployed, as well as partnerships. And maybe that's what I'll be focused on in terms of what I think is missing. And I'll assert a hypothesis, and the hypothesis is if you want to accelerate the introduction of technology, you need to bring the operator, the user, the person that's at the pointy end of the spear, and have good, rich conversation about, what their needs are, what their gaps are, what could we do with technology to allow the warfighter to work smarter, not harder. And you bring them in with academia and the labs and that whole community to really kind of explore what's the art of the possible with the technology, where's the technology going, where are the technology investments, and how we can make a difference. But you also have to bring in the industry partners, the engineering teams that can take that technology and deploy it in a way that's predictable and meaningful and can operate robustly in the environment in which it's intended to. So I'll just take you through just a quick personal story. So while I did spend a few years in the Air Force, most of my 35 years has been associated with Navy programs. And as I was flying in from Singapore last night, I was reflecting on San Diego. And I remembered my first business trip as a young systems engineer at Martin Marietta at the time on the Mark 41 vertical launching system was to San Diego to go talk to a company called GD Convair and explore the possibilities of could you put this Glick missile into a vertical launching system, and did we want to do strike warfare with an AAW ship, and how hard would it be to integrate that Tomahawk missile into VLS? And we worked through that, and then later on became vertical launch ASROC, and then RIM-7 and the ESSM, and we had great leaders, and we still have great leaders with Wayne Eugene Meyer. And you go through, the Missile Defense Agency being stood up in 1983, and the Navy's decision to really partner up with the agency, with Kate Page and others to sort out, well, what would the mission be for the Navy, in a Missile Defense Agency role? And today, the first admiral of the agency history is the director of the agency, Vice Admiral James Searing. And so at a long way we've come with bringing technology, bringing that capability, and deploying it across the board. And it brings in integrated air and missile defense and in a very meaningful way around the world, and the presence that's there. We just now morph that into Aegis Ashore, which went live in Romania at the end of the year. We've got ships deployed to Rota. So, the Navy's role in the Missile Defense Agency mission is significant. The Navy's role in the first day of operations is where are those Tomahawks and how do we make a difference? The Navy's role on integrated air and missile defense as we go to the future. If you think about, a lot of us grew up with a lot of PowerPoint slides with lightning bolts all over them, and how do you get to network-enabled warfare? How do you get to lethality that's distributed? We're there. I mean, we are queuing from sensors from multiple domains into integrated air and missile defense, and we're able to execute missions, very, very sophisticated missions. Think about what we can do when the Joint Strike Fighter comes, and if you could take that information that's on that jet and then distribute it around the network in the context of NIFCA. So, I guess I tip my hat to the organization. I think when we are focused, when we are partnering, when we are having the right conversation, and we're not being diluted by the big A and the contracts and the legal dimension, and we're really working with the PEOs to get that capability out into the warfighter's hands. We can and we are anxious to create those miracles, but it is a partnership around academia, the user, and the engineering teams across industry to bring those capabilities. So, exciting past and exciting future as we think about directed energy, as we think about the challenges that cyber presents for ourselves. We've got 3D printing and new material science activities that are going on, just a whole spectrum of new technologies. And I think if we can get that partnership, if we can get that conversation, we're anxious to partner with small business as well. They bring innovation, they bring agility, and they're an important part of everything that we do. And so, again, it's team sport. There certainly are plenty of distractors out there with, certainly the budget pressures, the political environment that we find ourselves in, the global environment that we find ourselves in. But at the end of the day, the threats continue to emerge. They continue to move forward. And I think if we can continue to have the partnership, the trust, the transparency, to have the modeling, the OA and the modeling and simulation and the focus, we can come together as a community and bring that technology and bring it in a meaningful way to the fleet. And so we're certainly passionate about that. And, Jay mentioned that Lockheed Martin acquired Sikorsky this past year, and we closed that back in November, and that's part of my responsibility. And as I look inside, what is the technology that's coming in the rotary wing aircraft? So we're wrapping up, we're in test on the 53K, and that's an exciting platform. Certainly the Romeo and Sierras continue to do really well. But if you look to future vertical lift and some of the technologies that's just around the corner, it is going to change. We're going to break through some barriers that have been there for many, many years since Igor Sikorsky invented the helicopter, and there's some great technologies coming in that regard. And if you think about the spectral sensors and apertures and the ability to converge EW and cyber and communications and RF and the ability to create a human-machine interface with data fusion that we're seeing on the Joint Strike Fighter and bringing that into rotary wing aircraft, I mean, there's just tremendous potential for the future. So I just would say speed of introduction of technology, we just need to continue to press hard to get that out there fast. I think the partnership between industry, academia, and most importantly the user is really key, to have that rich discussion so we can exploit what the art of the possible is. We can exploit where the technology is and where it's going. And from an industry perspective, we do have resources. We have our IRAD budgets, and we really are anxious to make sure every nickel we spend is solving a problem that you want solved and not some technology for technology's sake. So we appreciate the opportunity to partner. We look forward to continuing to be able to do that. And I think partnerships, trust, and transparency is the name of the game. Thank you.
Well, Dale, thank you so much, and I've taken some notes, and clearly I'm sure there'll be some follow-up questions on your very thoughtful comments. And now, Mr. Mike Petters.
Well, thanks, Jay, and let me say it's an honor to be on this panel with you guys. Somebody's got to carry up the trail end of this train, so I'm happy to be holding your coattails up for you guys. And I thank the Naval Institute for inviting me back. I was here a couple of years ago, and I really enjoyed this, and I think it's a great opportunity to create interchange of ideas and just mix it up. And I think that's part of the formula for the innovation thing that we're talking about. When I think about innovation, I kind of think about it in terms of what are we really trying to do? And what we're trying to do always is make sure that when a Navy ship goes over the horizon, it is a statement of our national purpose. And if you think about what's going on in that ship, we always think about it, well, it's a ship and it's got sailors on it. But those sailors are the best that we have from our country. The product of the ship comes from the best combination of technologies that we have as our nation. And as a friend of mine once told me, whenever you see a Navy ship in a foreign port, there's never a time when a U.S. sailor looks at one of those foreign ships and says, gosh, I wish I was on that ship. That never happens. And so if we think about this whole innovation and what the formula in innovation is and how do we sustain that, The way that I would like to think about it is in terms of kind of a healthy enterprise. The healthy enterprise meaning that 25 years from now, we're still going to be able to have those ships go across the horizon and be statements of national purpose. So I want to think about this in three dimensions. Any healthy enterprise, to be healthy, needs to be good at technology, it needs to be good at human capital, and it needs to be good at resource capital. Those are three things. Now, there's probably a lot of other things in there, but that, I'm not smart enough to carry around more than three things on my list. So let's talk about technology first. And a lot of times when you get on a panel around innovation, there's a lot of talk about technology because it's always the latest and greatest gadget. Moore's Law gets mentioned, and the pace of change and the disruption and all those kinds of things. And I think that's all exactly right. But let me suggest to you something that you'll be able to see. In fact, pitchers and catchers showed up this week. So starting in about 2 weeks, you're going to start to get to see this every day for the next 6 months. You show me a baseball team where every runner is safe at home, and I will show you a team that is not scoring as many runs as they could. Now you want to think about that, right? I mean, the third base coach has to make a split-second decision about whether to send that runner home or not. And they have to look at the speed of the runner, they have to look at the strength of the arm, how good the hit was, what's the game situation, it's the 5th inning, 9th inning, what is it? They have to make that judgment right away, and then the play happens at home, and he's either safe or he's out. Now, in baseball, what happens is the next time the third base coach has a better understanding of how fast that runner is, he has a better understanding of how good that arm is, he has a different way to think about the game situation, and so the third base coach is better at doing his job whether the runner was safe or out. But think about what we do institutionally if the runner is out. Right? Think about that. I mean, what we will end up doing is we will, by process, we will gravitate to the lowest common denominator to make sure that we don't ever send another runner home that will be out. Right? And we've just lost the opportunity to train our third base coach. Now, so I'm going to come back to that in the discussion, but I just want you to, that's the way I think about innovation is we've got to have people get thrown out at home, and we've got to think that that's okay, and we've got to celebrate those constructive failures. They have to be celebrated. You have to promote people who have failures, right? Thank God that happened for me. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is human capital. Human capital, I heard Secretary Mabus a few years ago talk about this, and I have 2 daughters who are teachers today in really tough school districts who are dealing with this firsthand. If you take the population of America from the ages of 18 to 24, and you stake out of that the folks who don't have a high school diploma, they don't have a criminal, or they don't have a high school diploma, they don't have a criminal record, and they are not physically fit. They have some kind of chronic problem. You're left with 25% of the population. 25% of the population carrying 75% of the population. Now, if you walk into a 5th grade classroom and you just stop and think about that for a minute, 1 in 4 kids in that classroom are going to be the kind of people that we're going to want to hire. The other 3 are going to be folks that are going to somehow we're going to have to pay for. So we've got a real challenge here in our education system. If you go out 25 years from a human capital perspective, that's a trend that absolutely cannot sustain itself. I believe that it's a national security issue. Today, in this country, 38% of our 3-year-olds go to preschool. The OECD average is 64%. 4-year-olds, it's 66% of our 4-year-olds go to preschool or go to school of some kind. The OECD average is 84%. We rank, as a nation, we rank 5th in the world in terms of educational investment. We are tied with Italy for 28th in performance. If we don't fix that, we can talk about innovation all you want to, but 25 years from now, we're not going to have anything that we can work with. So I think that is a national security issue that we have to go after and get. What you'll see right now in human capital is you'll see a lot of really cool stuff. You'll see us come up, we've got an apprentice school that we train folks at the end of their schooling to get them ready to be shipbuilders. You see out here, you see tablets for sailors so that they can learn things a lot faster. All of that, the innovation in education is absolutely great, and we need all of that. But my view is that in shipbuilding, if you spend an hour in the shop, it will cost you 3 hours on the platen, 5 hours on the dock, and 8 hours in the water to get that same job done. Whatever we're spending at the end of the workforce development pipeline, we could do a lot better if we spent it on the front end of that pipeline. And so that's a very important thing that is, in my view, is connected to the question of innovation in this country. The third thing I want to talk about, and I'm sure we'll come back to this as well, is capital, resource capital, and really talking about capital markets. As Jay pointed out, 5 years ago, we separated from Northrop Grumman, we spun out from them, and we got our first up-close and personal exposure to the capital markets, and we do that every quarter. In fact, yesterday we had another chance to meet up with the capital markets in person. And after 5 years of this, and I talked about this, I think, the last time I was here, but I think it's so true. In our business, we think about our business in terms of investment and return. We think about a project in terms of what do we need to invest in that project to make it work? What's the time frame of that investment? How long does it take to play out? And what's the return that we can expect to get on that? And it's not just quantitative, what's the qualitative return we get on that? And we have a very long view. Our businesses are successful because we have that kind of a long view. Our public process, our budget process, our government process is not an investment and return process. It is a budget and expense process. And those are fundamentally different ways of looking at the world. Absolutely, almost 180 degrees out. And so what ends up happening in a budget and expense process is you got to check and see how you're spending your money against your budget, but you don't necessarily, and if you spend a little bit more than the budget, you failed, right? If that runner is out at home, you failed. And so if you're thinking about the third base coach in terms of investment and return, for him to be able to learn something from having a runner safe or out at home is a return on the investment of sending that runner home. But if he's out and it's a failure, that's a mistake. And that is going to be sawing at the bones of whether we can have a long-term, healthy, sustainable effort at innovation. So as we talk some more about this, Jay, that's kind of the way I think about it, is down those three dimensions. Do we have the technology right? We've got great gadgets. We've got cool stuff out there, but are we allowing ourselves to constructively fail? Human capital, we're doing a lot of stuff to train people at the end of the pipeline. We're not doing anywhere near enough at the beginning of the pipeline to get that right. And resource capital, we've got to learn how to talk with the American citizens about risk. We have to do that. They understand it, but we need to learn how to make it safe to talk about it. And so happy to talk some more about that.
No, thank you so much. Mike Petters may have indicated he was last, but you can see from the quality and the caliber of the presentations, I'm clearly the runt of this litter. So I would like to follow up very quickly on each of the speakers. And like Mike, and I'm here to admit, if we have any priests or rabbis in the audience, I have sinned, and I have sinned verily. I have destroyed multi-million-dollar machines at sea. But you know, I didn't intend to. And the people I were working for at the time saw more goodness in me than bad, thought I could be trained, still think I can be trained, made an investment, or I wouldn't be here. So the difference between a letter of caution and instruction and a punitive letter is the difference between life and death in a career. Mike talked about investment portfolios. I've been on both sides now, so has Secretary O'Keefe. The reality is business is a P&L. It is a profit and loss. The U.S. government and the U.S. Navy is just an L. There is no P. All the government does is spend money. Ideally, we spend it wisely. We spend it intelligently. We spend it with accountability. When you are on the other side and you understand the accountability associated with the P, and it doesn't have to be a big P, it really changes the calculus. And that's why I'm so pleased to have this group here. So, in a little bit of a lightning round, for Secretary O'Keefe, again, you have been on both sides here. From being where you controlled the resources to when you had to fulfill the resources at EADS Airbus. With that experience over really a significant period of time between the two, what was missing? What is the constructive recommendation that you would make to this audience, to these resource sponsors, to these warfighters that can better do exactly what Mike Petter said, and that is give us the best demonstration of the Navy as we sail over the horizon?
Mm-hmm. The mindset that has definitely accelerated, crept into the thinking across the board, and we've referred to it in several cases here, is the notion that risk aversion is because folks are in a position of saying, when it goes wrong, I don't want to be the one that's going to be, sent to the hoosegow on this, or held accountable for something I did not control or did not have the opportunity to do. And so the solution typically that you hear, and I think that the answer, Jay, to your posed point, is how you communicate as leadership to those that recognizing that's going to be an omnipresent view. It is something that's reinforced with great regularity. Every one of us up here has referred to it in some manner, shape, or form, in how that has crept into more and more an unwillingness to really look beyond that tyranny of incrementalism I talked about. And as a consequence, the approach that's typically been employed is leadership to say, I'm behind you all the way, absolutely. I'm going to make sure I defend you when this goes right, wrong, or indifferent. And to the extent you need that defense, I'll be right there. And folks look at you and say, yeah, okay, I hear you. Your lips are moving, but, I don't believe you. And when it really comes down to it, I don't think anybody's going to be there with a net. So as a consequence, the slight variation to this that always made a difference, I found, on certainly the industry side of this, was to pose, and it was true as well on the public leadership end of this, was how you've put the context of this, of the people around you, is you can always come to me on anything that's being proposed and tell me, yes, we could do that if the following conditions exist. You can't come in and say, no, because here are all the reasons why you can't do it. That suddenly changes the dynamic. It changes this from a proposition in which you have to disprove the fact that there's sufficient information to say, yes, if the following things exist, we can do this. Now, they all don't line up, probably not a good idea to do. As opposed to, no, and let me tell you all the obstacles we have to overcome right off the bat before we can ever start the discussion. That always kills everything right off the bat. Nobody wants to go take on how do you deal with everyone, and usually the obstacles are mythology, folklore, or something else, that goes into it, but or history. And as a consequence, all those things, I think, can be overcome dominantly by just the leadership viewpoint up front that says, tell me all the things I have to do. What are the conditions that have to be present in order to make this innovation, this change, this event, this decision possible to do, as opposed to the other way around?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Dale, following on a lightning round, and thank you so much for mentioning 3D printing. In the 3 days I've been here, you are only the second person to mention 3D printing, and it was not elucidated. This is a fundamental change. This is a revolutionary change in the logistics, supply chain. It's incredible, and I don't think, as we've talked about cyber and everything else, we've come to grips with that. We don't have time for that in the lightning round. What I wanted to share with you or ask you is on the issue of accountability, continuity, responsibility on the program manager side, the government side. Where we have evolved is we rotate 06s every 2 years. They are incentivized to have metrics and vectors that show their success over that period of time, take credit, move on, and then when it comes to operational test and evaluation or shock tests, at the end of the program, they've been promoted and maybe retired at a significantly higher rank. I was there when it was JAST. JSF is a 20-year program. How have you handled that at Lockheed Martin? What are the challenges it has brought with every new shiny penny, and how can we do better? Do we need to keep an 06 there until OT&E is done and then meritoriously promote him to Vice Admiral and retire him or her? What is the solution?
That's a great question. That's a complex question. I would say, there's a continuity of the civilian workforce that really provides that continuity as the uniform folks are coming, through the programs. I think, in the words of, Wayne Eugene Meyer, build a little, test a little, learn a lot, and set proper expectations so you're not looking for the big bang, out to DTOT. You're putting something out in front of the fleet that's not ready to go to the fleet. So I think, backing that up. On the industry side, we certainly have, in partnership, the opportunities to do a little bit more robust, ops analysis, threat-based ops analysis, and really kind of vet the technologies, before we commit to actually building steel and putting it out there. Creeping requirements is always a tough issue, and making sure that we've got a very good understanding of what we're trying to do. We have a very good understanding of what those requirements are and how we're going to verify those requirements. And I think, if we continue to maintain that discipline there, I think, keeping 06s there for too long is probably not going to, meet the needs of the Navy in terms of developing those third base coaches out there that need those set of experiences. But I do think, the civilian workforce, the continuity that they provide, the leadership there, as well as the industry's in it for the long haul normally as well. So I think there's good continuity there as long as the trust is there and the transparency.
I think I'm hearing a theme here of balance, that we may be out of balance and we could do better on both sides of balance.
Right, and certainly I think, putting more power back into the PEO and the folks that are trying to deliver the capability of the fleet, and a little less, we certainly have to have oversight with the contracts and the checks and balances. There's a way to do that without swinging the pendulum so far that the PEOs don't have the authority to drive every day to get the capability to the fleet.
Well, thank you so much. Continuing with the lightning round for Mike Petters, and you can see why he's such an effective CEO, and with the capital investment in the apprentice school. I'm a little prejudiced. I'm a Tidewater resident, so I appreciate what he does for the Tidewater area. But 2 issues for you, sir. How do you see, and what is the relationship when the Navy, on the requirements side, goes ahead and issues a change order for a ship or technology or capability? What can we do better to have the balance of them understanding the cost, the schedule, impact, which they may not be sensitive to because they're not putting the compartments together, they're not sequencing the construction of the ship, and naval aviation and shipbuilding really approach this quite differently. And then secondly, but aligned with that, a lot of my naval aviator friends say they would rather serve on a recently overhauled Newport News, but 25-year-old aircraft carrier than on a new construction, recently delivered aircraft carrier, because the technology timeline for insertion on the overhaul carrier can be as little as 3 years, whereas on the new con, the equipment is bought as much as 9 years in advance and is already 1 or 2 technology cycles out of date. I'm really talking the tactical equipment by the time the carrier is delivered. And I know you struggle with this every day. Would you share with the audience, please?
Right. So I, you can tell I like to tell stories, and I'm going to tell you a little story here that may try to answer both of these questions. I'm sure that many of you in the audience have had the pleasure of trying to ride with your children as they're learning to drive. Right? So I was riding with my daughter in my old truck, and it's night, and somebody had come up behind us, and they had their bright lights on. In my old truck, I had one of those mirrors with a little clip on it. Remember those? You know, you clip that and flip it right out of your eyes. Well, she's driving, and she's squinting because these bright lights are right in her eyes. And I'm hyper aware of everything that's going on at this point. And so I finally said, so Caroline, don't you know you can just reach up here and flip this? And I flipped it, and it moved right. And she says, gosh, that's a lot better. And I said, didn't you know you could do that? And she said, no, I didn't know you could do that. And I said, well, why not? And she says, well, on Mom's car, I don't have to do that. Really? So I went and I looked at Mom's car, because I didn't drive Mom's car that much. Mom's car's got a mirror that measures the light that comes in and automatically reduces the reflection so it doesn't blind the driver. So somebody out there has decided that drivers would be safer and there would be less accidents if you change the mirrors and make them electronic so that they reduce the light. Somebody did that. Now, if I need to replace the mirror on my truck, I can go down to Pep Boys and I can spend $25 on the mirror and $10 on the glue, and I can do it myself. If I want to replace the mirror on Mom's car, what does it take? I got to go to the shop. They got to tell me what's wrong. Then they got to decide, can they fix it or do they need to get a new one? And if they need to get a new one, they got to order the parts because it's not at Pep Boys. And then it's going to be another trip a couple of weeks later when they come and they put it in, and the bill's not going to be $35. It's going to be $350. And the question is, and I think, Jay, you were kind of getting at this, is how do you ask the question that says, is this worth it? Mm-hmm. You know, is this worth it? Can we live with, mirrors that you flip the little tab on, or do we have to have self-adjusting mirrors? And I think you can do that across the board on every, just take that example and think about that, whether you're thinking about change orders, and the way change orders come into the production line. The partnership that you've talked about means that the company and the government have to actually look at the change order and say, is this something that's worth doing? And we actually do that. We have our relationship with the Navy is a very strong partnership, and there are lots of times where we have change orders being discussed, and we're very involved with the question of, is this really worth doing or not? We don't always agree, I will tell you. And there will be somebody somewhere that says, no, you don't have a choice, you can't talk about it, you have to do it. And I think that points to something that's even deeper in our society that we have to go deal with as leaders across everything that we do. And Sean, you and I were talking about this last night a little bit. I think that we are losing the ability to actually recognize judgment. Mm-hmm. We used to have people that you could take something to and say, this is what the design says, and this is the only way you can make it, and they're not the same. Can we live with that? And the veteran would sit there and say, you've met the intent, we can live with that, I'll sign off on it, go forth and do good. We don't do that anymore. What we do now is, you've met the intent, we understand why you've got a design here that's not producible, that's too bad. Take it apart, Go do it again, because I'm not about to sign off on this, because if I sign off on this, this runner might be out at home.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem for us. So I think that this whole thing is caught up in this idea of how do you have constructive failure. And the challenge between the, new ships and overhauled ships is that it's really all about that, because on the new ship, you really are trying to get all of this stuff in there on the front end, and I can understand the sentiment that you're fighting this for the first few years of a ship's life. You're fighting this in a lot of areas. So.
Well, we have time for questions, and we have microphones, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Sir? Hi, good morning. I'm sorry, unless I'm accused of deception. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Travis Reese. I'm actually on the Commandant's Strategic Initiatives Group. So in Mufti right now. My question particularly to the panel is who should lead innovation? We've kind of skirted around the enterprise. We've talked about the various interests, but somebody must be in charge necessarily. When I think about JSIDs and the FAR and all the necessary controls that were introduced at some point in time because of some gross errors, now we're talking about some issues that are related to a triangular conflict. You've got the services. They have their perspective, broadly capabilities-based. They've got the RIT and the Title X responsibility to design a force. You've got the geographic command and commanders. They're focused on threat. You've got OSD and others who are really much more resource-based. To Mr. Petter's issue, more particularly, it's budget and expense. And so they look at things much more from a resource effectiveness basis. With that being the case, then, you know, in Marine Corps mythology, we have the legend of General Krulak and his experience with the Higgins boat and with helicopters. So we think of that as the optimal return in terms of services. But with the recent discussions about acquisition reform and Goldwater Nichols, who then should be given primacy in leading the enterprise and setting the conditions? May I leave that to you, gentlemen?
Colonel, before you sit down,
Sir.
do you think it would be better to have it at the lowest effective level, meaning the service, or at the highest efficient level of DOD?
I think
You're
about
in
it.
Mufti.
Yes. So I think about it from the perspective of the services, and here's why. We have multiple missions and capabilities we have to address. So we know that war is inherently inefficient. We also know that we expect things to be lost. So you need compensatory capabilities that should be overlapping, redundant, and effective, but based on various conditions. And we also have the best perspective on which organization best suits the technology or the innovation. We design things from a perspective of a larger, broader concept, which in all Jason's documents are balanced between that which the AOA or the evaluation tells you ought to look like and what's most effective, and that which you say is the real condition from which you're going to face. So based on, for example, the discussion earlier about collaborative experimentation, warfighters meet labs, kind of come together. I suspect that the services are best in that position to design that. They have customers, GCCs, they have controls and strategic guidance from OSD. I think that that ought to be the lead, but that's my perspective.
So, gentlemen, how do you feel?
What worries me about that, and again, I think this very noble objective of what you're asking for. Find an advocate, find a champion who is going to carry the spear of innovation and be the responsible official for trying to help it work. Got it. The catch with that is it has an unintended consequence.
Sure.
When you do this. It basically signals to the rest of the community, no worries, somebody's got the responsibility for innovation over there. You don't need to worry about that anymore. And therefore, you're relieved of that duty. And the reality is, no. This ought to be something that's built into everything that goes on. I mean, every answer to the kinds of questions and issues and problems that Mike put on the table ought to be an element of empowerment to say, let's put the judgment into this.
Sure.
Let's use the opportunities of what we're seeing in front of us to really achieve some solution to this problem by either the technology insertion or by the different process methodology, whatever it is. That's always going to be done most effectively at the place in which the problem originates. And so therefore, the technology or the innovation advocate needs to be the leadership of that community, and indeed of the service overall, to say part of this is everybody's empowered to do that. You have to start with the proposition that you're expected to go there. And again, this falls on deaf ears when they're reassured that I'll be right behind you. You bet I'll support you every step of the way. And then you find out that they're way back there, you know. This is the pogo kind of problem, you know. Find me a parade so I get out and lead it, or if it goes wrong, I can get in the back of it. And it's a completely different kind of environment of leadership that really has to be infused to say, no, I want to hear the solution to this and have it settled at the point in which the event presents itself. And if anything, there ought to be great caution exerted in establishing another chief of something. Is in doing so, you end up, again, inadvertently creating absolution for everybody else to say, you're not responsible for that, someone else is.
Mr. Secretary, how do you really feel? Dale, Mike, would you care to elucidate, or should I go on to the next question?
Yeah, I could maybe just add a little bit to it. So, you know, I do think you don't want these things to be driven up at OSD. You want to get them down into the services. You want to get them down into the PEOs and out into the environment, the operational environment. And, you know, we've, you know, in the undersea world, you know, due to a burning platform of reduced ASW investments and an emerging threat, you know, we had to reinvent how we went about ASW and created what's called the ARCHI model, which is a very rapid, constant introduction of capability. And it's a closed loop system with the operators involved, the small business involved, the large business involved, and it's a way to really kind of look at where is technology going, do it in a 2-year cycle, and everybody gets a vote. And at the end of the day, there's some testing that goes on to see that we get a return on that invested capital, which is a very unique model. And so I think there are models out there. I will say, if you push it down, you'll get it, and you'll get a better decision because you'll have people that are closer to the relative data. And if you have it up too high, everything's compromised, right? And you'll end up not, you know, you might have something that's got some utility, but it won't be, you know, satisfactory to the fleet. So I do think kind of pushing it down a little bit.
Fair enough. Thank you, gentlemen.
And I would just echo that. I think that, you know, organizational questions always come down to what do you want the structure to take care of, and what do you want to manage yourself? And so, you know, we have watched, during the Cold War, we watched another country try to centrally plan everything, and that didn't work out so well. And so my view is you need to be able to push it down as far as you can still maintain the alignment of accountability, authority, and responsibility. And if you can do those things, federating it out is a much better solution for the organization than centralizing it.
Captain?
Yes, I'm Captain Jim Raimondo. I'm the Federal Executive Fellow at the Fletcher School and Naval Institute, and a big baseball guy. In fact, I still play. So, Mr. Petters, for you, how do we go, and what maybe a specific way do you assess and measure and reward employees that would lessen the ability or tendency that we have to fire a third base coach? In general, our assessments, in my view anyway, our fit reps do not really support multiple failures, maybe even one failure. So I'm curious, you know, from lessons learned or an example you could give for active duty in that regard.
Yeah, I hate fit reps. I mean, I seriously, why do we do them? We do fit reps because there's someday along the way, we needed to move a problem employee and we needed to document it.
Yeah.
That's why we do it. We don't do it because I need to sit down with Sean and say, you know, Sean, you're doing a great job, and if you did this a little bit, because I do that. I do that all the time. You know, I have those discussions with employees. So we've moved our system down to sort of the least common denominator solution, so that we have paperwork on everybody. So when we have to move somebody the wrong way or move them out of the organization, we have that paperwork available to us. So I despise those kinds of things in our organization. And rather, I think the better question from the leadership standpoint is, you know, are you having the kind of conversations that we're talking about? Are you talking about what's working, what's not working? But as a leader in your area of responsibility, are you asking the question, can you describe for me a constructive failure? What's the constructive failure that you learn the most from? You know, there's Lou Gerstner wrote a great book about Who Says Elephants Can't Dance. And if you've read that book, you'll know the story of the program manager that lost $15 million when Lou first took over. I see nods out there. So he brings the program manager in, brand new CEO. He brings him in, and he runs the guy through the gauntlet of how could you lose $15 million on this program. And the guy, by the end of the hour, he was, I don't think he was still sitting straight. I mean, it was just one of those intense hours. But at the very end, Lou says, okay, thank you, you can go. The guy looks at him and says, sir, am I fired? And he says, fire you? Why would I fire you? I just spent $15 million training you. So talk to me about constructive failures. Just put that question in your dialogue with your people, and it will start to change the way that people respond.
Captain, two very, very quick thoughts. There's a saying, experience is what you get immediately after you needed it. And I will tell you what I've observed, and I survived this with Secretary Rumsfeld, who didn't like to be told other than what he was thinking. He asked me one day, I was Chief of Naval Research, what is wrong with acquisition and why can't we do better? And I said, well, we're risk adverse. And I said, the reality is not only are we risk adverse, if a program manager, a PEO, takes risk on capability, on cost, on change, and is successful, he or she still does not get promoted, because at the promotion board, that individual is briefed as a risk taker. And yes, they were successful, but it's in their genes. And if we promote them, they'll take risk again. And they will train risk takers. And where will we be? Ladies and gentlemen, that's not a joke. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I guess I have a statement more than a question, but my name is Emily Harmon. I'm the new director of the Department of Navy's Office of Small Business Programs, and I've heard small business mentioned quite a bit up here, and I just wanted to let people know who I am. If you have any questions, you can come talk to me, but I'm trying to change the culture with respect to small business and the thoughts of small business within the Department of the Navy, as we're trying to get more innovative products and solutions to our war fighters. I think small businesses can bring that. My predecessor, Rear Admiral Sean Crean, retired, had a motto for the Department of Navy's Office of Small Business Programs, and it was small business the first option. And my position is that should not be the Small Business Office's motto. It should be everyone in the Department of Navy, not to meet a goal, but to think of other ways of getting the best product to the fleet. It doesn't always have to come through large businesses. It can come through large, but it can also come through smalls as primes or as subcontractors. But all of the challenges that you're mentioning about the risk are big barriers to trying to do things a different way. So,
well, thank you so much, and may I recommend you write an article for Naval Institute Proceedings?
I wrote an article on that, and I will share it with Naval Institute Proceedings.
Thanks so much.
My direct question is to Mr. Petters, but before I do that, I want to give some feedback, and maybe it's a compliment to Admiral Hayward, to you, sir, and to your predecessors, but there is a return on investment we don't recognize. We beat ourselves up in the military for not being innovative, but many of the technologies in this were sponsored or initiated by the U.S. Navy and the Department of Defense. Steve Jobs was able to do the demand push, but our efforts have a return on investment to our nation that we rarely or ever recognize. Qualcomm, it's that way, was built initially on Navy DAMA technology. That's telecommunications, and that's what they built the company on to start. So we forget there is an investment that we can't measure, that we don't measure, and I wish the Navy and other services could get royalties. But
and for Mike Petters, your question?
Okay, question for Mike Petters. Do you get traction? Well, let's put it this way. Globalization, I study it a lot. It's spun away from where the economists said it would be, and now we've lost many of the high-paying blue-collar jobs in the U.S. Now, your industry is one that still has them. Do you get traction with Congress beyond the Virginia delegation on what you're delivering for the nation? Because you are still preserving those jobs for people who don't want to be burger flippers or major in double E. Do you get any traction from that? Do they, is there any recognition of how important that is beyond, the carrier costs too much? So what do you get?
Yeah, no, there is. That's a great question, and there is a lot of recognition. When you send the ship over the horizon and it comes from suppliers in all 50 states, when those suppliers walk into their members of Congress and talk about the jobs in Iowa, the shipbuilding jobs in Iowa, which is always an interesting conversation, it does get traction. There's no question about that. But I would tell you that the fundamental issue of workforce development and creating the pipeline, there's a statistic out there that is really hard to deal with from our standpoint, because 90% of the people that we're going to hire in the next 5 years do not need a bachelor's degree. They need to have a high school diploma, an associate's degree for many of them, but they don't need to have a bachelor's degree. And yet there is a statistic that says that in any area, the correlation between the percentage of bachelor's degrees and the economic growth, that's the highest correlated statistic, the highest correlated factor is percentage of bachelor's degrees in a particular area that leads to economic growth. And our governments are always interested in economic growth. And so you end up with this kind of rivalry between the higher education folks and the workforce development people and the K through 12 people and the preschool people. They're all kind of fighting over their share of a smaller budget, and that becomes a real challenge. That's all at the state level. That's at the federal level. When you start talking about workforce development, you've got 45 programs in 9 agencies. It's almost impossible to navigate. At the state level, we're the largest employer in Virginia and in Mississippi. I have direct access to the governor and his workforce council on things that need to be done. And our experience is that as an organization, whether you're big or small, if you invest in that state workforce development pipeline, you get out of it what you put into it. Mm-hmm. A lot of people sit at the end of the pipeline and are unhappy with the product, but they're not invested in it. We're very happy with the product we get out because we invest in it. And that's where the real traction is.
And Tony, you're going to get to wrap this up.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate it. Former acquisition guy in some ways in the Navy, and Jay would probably argue with that I've had my failures along the way too. But let's, for the panel, there was the idea of conditions for success. The service chiefs are now being reinserted back into the acquisition process. And the theory is that will get the right things to the warrior at the right time. So for the panel, what are the conditions for success putting the service chiefs back inside the business, which I personally think was not probably the right move, but that's a different story. So the conditions for success, given that's the road we're going to go down.
Yes, sir.
This one really worries me a lot because it dilutes the focus of what the service chief and those they lead need to be really concentrating on, which is the operational capacity of what's going on. And, you just, the notion that somehow we're going to include the service chief into the same equation that results in the consequences that my friend here referred to at the very beginning of this conference, in which you were then held accountable afterwards for why did you sign that contract, why did you step up to that circumstance, what did you do, and you're now responsible for that, poses some real challenges because if anything, you'd rather not have the service chief concentrating on that kind of blocking and tackling. It's more a case of how do I frame what the requirement is, what the mission objectives are, how do I use it operationally to the forces I'm here to represent and make certain that they can use it for these purposes. And therefore, I've got the responsibility to be sure those who do have this responsibility do so responsibly. That's a different kind of equation. So how this now, as you said, I think it's done, there it is, this is what the mandate is for the time being, is great care has to be exerted on how to do this, because otherwise what you end up with is, much like so many other things, a replication of the same capacities in the Pentagon, in the superstructure, that spend their time crossing over each other over who owns this requirement and who owns this responsibility. And you spend more time arguing about that turf warfare nonsense than you do about the actual task of, I'm here to assure, as the uniformed service chief in the operational uniform role, that this is what the mission objective is, and does it or doesn't it meet that objective? And let's go about the business of making sure that it does. That's a big responsibility in and of itself. And I counted on the judgment of the Chief of Naval Operations at the time I served to be able to make that call with regularity and offer that viewpoint so that you could make an informed decision based on that critical task. And it's not an easy one to do, and it takes an enormous amount of experience to actually lead to the capabilities to make that judgment, and in the end, therefore, make that call, and do it in a way that only those people are qualified to do.
We're just a little bit over time, but Secretary O'Keefe was there at the start of Goldwater and Ingalls, and so he remembers those improvements fondly. As Goldwater and Ingalls proceeded, we had the train, equip, and recruit side throw requirements over an ever higher wall to the acquisition, contracts, and legal people. And a contracts officer, and I love them dearly, gets paid the same for contracting for toilet paper or a nuclear carrier. And the result to them is the same, an expenditure of funds. I see this as a long overdue course correction that the service chiefs are going to have to figure out how to do properly to not distract them, but I think it brings accountability back. Mike, Dale, do you want to say anything along those lines?
All I would say is what I said before. When everyone comes to me with an organization chart and they say they start the conversation with, we're going to put Joe in this job, what I ask them is, tell me how authority, accountability, and responsibility are going to flow. If you can't answer, and I don't care who's in the job, it's not about Joe, it's about the structure. And if authority, accountability, and responsibility are going to flow in the organization in such a way that the mission of the organization can be more successful than it is today, then we can talk about the organizational structure. Right. But if it's not, go back and work on that and sort that out first, and then let's talk about people. Yeah. And so we do that all the time. Every organization chart that I get, and I get them all the time, but my team knows they better be able to answer that question first before they start putting names in boxes.
Dale, we're going to give you the very last word.
I have nothing to add.
Well said, and how about a hand for this great group? Thank you so much.
Admiral Cohen, on behalf of, and the panel, on behalf of USNI and FCA, I'd like to make a presentation. Naval Innovation is the book. I think it's perfectly right for this discussion. Thank you for your insights and the discussion we had today. And thanks to the questions. That was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.